In this help video, I'd like to look at how to set up Blackbird from Shark Indicators for doing our initial entry and initial stop placement with our MTPredictor setups. But before we open Blackbird, I just want to have a look in detail about what we were going to be requiring for our initial setups. Here's a nice PB buy setup, but can you see how the setup and the entry would have been on the same bar? So if I place the analysis on this, can you see how that's where our entry trigger would have been, which is one tick above the high of the blue bar, and then our initial stop would have been one tick below the last swing low. So in this example, they were both on the same bar. Now that's worth remembering. Let's have a look at some different examples. Here there was another buy setup, but this time if I place the analysis on the blue buy bar, can you see how the blue buy bar was one bar after the low? So the entry would have been one tick above the high of the trigger bar, in other words the blue buy bar, but the initial stop placement would have actually been below the low of the swing low, which actually was one bar ago. So as you'll see in a minute, it was actually the lowest low of the last two bars. Let's have a look at some other entries here. Oh, actually, just before I carry on, can you see how this trade, the trade was actually entered on the bar after the entry trigger. Same with this one. The long trade was actually entered on the bar after the entry trigger. But if I have a look at another one, so for example there's a sell setup here. So here the entry trigger was on the bar of the low. The initial stop trigger was on the swing high, which was actually two bars earlier, so a bar earlier than the entry. But can you see how here the entry here, the short entry, was actually 2 bars after the trigger bar. So the trigger bar was this red sell bar, but the entry was 2 bars later. Same on this buy setup here. Even though the initial stop and the entry trigger were on the same bar, can you see how the entry wasn't on the bar after the trigger bar, it was actually the bar after that, so it was actually 2 bars time. So again, that's something just to think about once we get into the Shark indicators, because what we want to think about is when a trade isn't triggered. So for example, if there was a buy setup on this bar that I'm highlighting, can you see where the cursor is here? I don't know whether there is, but if there was a buy setup there, we want to then cancel all orders if it's invalidated after a set number of bars. So that's why we want to make sure that we're either entered into a trade after a set number of bars, or if not, then we cancel all the orders, and we'll see that in a minute. So right, that's what we have to have there. By the way, it's a nice trade setup unfolding here. Gone way past our entry target, sorry, our initial target. It's actually going up quite nicely, so that's a good trade that's unfolding. But anyway, that's just by the by. Right, here's Blackbird enabled. So let's open a order set that I had set up a little while ago. Right, so this is an example order set that I have set up already. Again, this is just for example. Please don't just follow this as absolute. This is just something to get you started. In other words, it's a place where you can use as your starting point. Let's go through a couple of the things at the top here. The main one you want to look at is the money management here. Do you see this button here? It's the money management. And also the account risk. So there's daily safeguards and daily watermarks that you can look at yourself, but I wanted to look at the account risk. This is our position sizing. So what you need to do here is you need to put in your account size. This is the account size that you're trading with, and also your risk per trade. So this will then use your entry price and your stop price to then calculate how many lots or contracts or shares to trade. So it's our position sizing. So set that up first. Scheduling, we'll have a look at another video. We don't need to look at this. Under options, you don't need to really allow re-entry on the same bar, because basically you're going to be triggered, but you can't allow that. You can also think about whether you want to have opposite signals force a reversal trade. I normally keep it that if you're in a trade, you just want to run with that trade and not then force a reversal if you get an opposite signal. But again, that's for you to decide in your own back testing. Right, so the first thing we've done is we've set up in Bloodhound a set of triggers, but that's covered in another video. I want to go over these order sets here. So the first thing to look at is the entry. So if I click on this, so I want to look at the entry. So I tend to have it, if I go back to initial options, so I tend to have it where we're having a stop. So we place the stop basically when the entry trigger or when the signal trigger happens. So if we look at the initial placement, this is the main one to look at. Here for long trades, you want to be looking to buy one tick above the high of the entry bar. So for short trades, you want to be selling one tick, so in other words -1 below the low of the bar. The look back period is 1 because you want to do it as of the bar of the trigger, and this is also important here. You use maximum values or minimum values. So in other words, it looks at the lowest low or the highest high for the one bar to do the entry trigger. That's important when we come on to the initial stop loss. You'll see how that will be slightly different then. So here I look at the price, then the high, look back period 1, max values, and then 1, and then obviously the reverse for short trades. Place immediately, because obviously you want to place it immediately, but this is the cancel here. This is what I was talking about, is how many bars you want to cancel your order, whether you want to cancel it after 1 bar, in other words you want to be filled on the very next bar after the entry signal or the entry trigger has come up, or whether you actually want to leave that option for 2 bars or maybe 3 bars. That's up for you to do some testing and then decide on what works for you. So that's something you can actually change. So that's all you need for the entry. Profit target, what I tend to do is I just tend to set it way out there in the future. In other words, a lot higher or lower, depending on whether you're long or short, depending on where you're going. Then once it's placed, you can then grab and drag it to your MTPredictor profit targets. For this, I just simply use the ATR. So I've just used price, I've used an indicator of the ATR, and I've just set it to a factor of 10. It doesn't really matter what this comes out at. You can do it at 8, 9, whatever it is. It's just a little bit away, or a long way away from the entry price. I've set that out to just be the OCO entry price, or the average entry price. You can then just play with that yourselves, but the idea being is that we've used the ATR because that changes depending on market volatility, and just set it to be a long way out from the initial entry, and then you can grab and drag it once you're actually into a trade. But again, you can play with these levels and values to see what fits your own trading style. Let's have a look at the stop loss. This is the last thing I want to look at. So this is probably the most important one. I'm not going to go into the trailing actions in this particular video because that's quite complicated. I just want to go to the initial entry. So again, we have just as a stop order, but this is the bit that was slightly different compared to the entry order, in that for long trades, because we want to have our stop below the low, we want to offset it by -1 tick. For short trades, we want to above the high, and we want to offset it by 1 tick. But here's the look back period. This is the thing that's slightly different, because do you remember we were saying at the start that you can get an entry trigger 1 or 2 bars after the swing high or low? That's why when we do the entry order, its look back period is 1. In other words, you want to only use the highest high or the lowest low of that entry bar, but for the stop you want to catch the swing pivot. So here for a long trade it would be the low look back period. I've used 2. You could actually put that up to 3. Depends on what you want to do, again on your own back testing. But here I've actually used, do you see, it's the minimum values, and in the short trades it's the maximum values. So what this does, it looks at the lowest low over the last 3 bars and then uses that as the initial stop, less 1 tick for your long trades. Again, reverse that for your short trades. So it looks back 3 bars or 2 bars depending on what you want to set this, but it looks at, in this case, the maximum value of the last 2 bars for the high for the last couple of bars plus 1 tick. That's what I tend to use. Again, trailing actions, I'll go into that in a separate video. So these are the initial settings I tend to use for my backtesting and research with MTPredictor, but hopefully it's just giving you an idea to give you a starting point then for you to do your own research from there. Obviously Blackbird is a very, very sophisticated and incredible software program that can do so much, and you can actually tweak these values and actually make them exactly how you want to build your own personal trading system, but at least this will give you an initial starting point.